Hello everyone, welcome to Self-Knowledge. Today we'll have lecture number 19 of this course of 50 lectures that have the intention of giving the information and the techniques so we can all get to know ourselves. The topic that we'll deal with today is very interesting because it's based a lot on practical life, and if we understand it, it will help us learn to live intelligently by learning to correctly combine the external events that are all the circumstances that happen to us at every moment in our daily living with an adequate inner state. Allow me just a second to check if everything is okay with the broadcast. So we start with today's lecture. Allow me just a second. Let me check. Just a moment. Yeah, I think everything is okay. So, as I was saying, to understand the importance of this issue, let's analyze a little the different contrasts that we can commonly see in life and that are really very surprising. And that if we analyze them, sorry, let me fix this here. Yeah, okay. So I was saying that if we analyze this contrast, we can come to understand how many times external appearances do not correspond to what is lived internally. Sometimes we hear it is said that there is no one who understands life, and this is because of the contrast that we can appreciate in it. We see very wealthy people who have all the luxuries that other people could only wish for, who have mansions, plenty of money, yachts. However, they suffer terribly because they suffer from worries, diseases, heartbreaks, betrayals, losses, problems of impotence, or because even though they have it all, they still have the same existential void that has not been filled because it cannot be filled with money, luxuries, prestige, nor fame. We already see the case of famous singers and actors or people with great social power who suffer the terrible scourge of depression, who end up committing suicide. And it is surprising because whoever doesn't have achieved in their lives the things that those people have reached think that their sadness, their dissatisfaction, their existential emptiness will be healed or filled if they get this or they get that. And they usually think that they are going to achieve happiness if they get a better job or if they get a lot of money or if they get fame, and it is not like that. I once read something a famous actor said that caught my attention, and he said, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it is not the answer. And this is because we don't understand that happiness never comes from external events, but from our inner state. We see how people who have a lot of power, statements, or people who have achieved a lot of power by trafficking drugs and stuff, how they live in prison even if they are free. They cannot really enjoy the things that they have obtained because now they must walk around with guards armed to the teeth, and they cannot just sleep safely. In contrast, we can see people who have very little, who don't meet the requirements of what is socially understood as someone, successful, but you can see that they live happy. They constantly smile, or truly enjoy the small details of life. And it is for that reason that we must understand that happiness doesn't depend on external events, but on our internal state. Many times we don't understand why we are unhappy. Why do we suffer? And it is because we must learn to live intelligently. And so let's go deeper so that we can understand the differences between external events and internal states and how we can learn to combine them properly. So let's first see what is an event. Events are the things that happen externally. For example, today, several events have already happened to us, like, for example, breakfast with the family, or the one that I had to go to work because of a Sunday meeting, or lunch with friends. I don't know, maybe a discussion with the couple. They are all events that would have happened to us today. And if we are going to talk about our own life to someone, then we would mention different events such as, I don't know, the accident that I had as a child, or when I went to school, or my graduation, my wedding day, the birth of my son. And we tell our life as a succession of events where we include names, surnames, dates, etc. But that is not the complete story, since we usually omit the internal aspect, like the mood or the inner state that we had at those events, that usually truly defines the quality of that lived event. And having understood what is an event, let's see what is an inner state. A state is the anemic disposition that we have in front of an event, or we could say the mood we have in each event. We must note that events are exterior while states are interior, but that these are a fundamental part of an event because, as I said, they will determine how we experience that event. We can see that in the same event, for example, let's say a party, not everyone has the same spirit, not everyone will have the same mood. Some will be happy, others will be bored, others will be worried. Therefore, everyone will experience the same exact event in a totally different way. As an event in my life, I could mention that I went to school for the first time at the age of 5. That was an event in my own life. But what was the mood I had at that event? Well, I was scared, sad, actually I felt abandoned, while other children at the same event were excited, were curious, were happy. So what can we learn from here? That we suffer, we feel dissatisfied or miserable, not because of the external event, but because we don't know how to have a conscious state, a correct inner state before the different events that happen to us in life. So what is important is to learn to have a conscious inner state before the different events we have to live. But it is interesting to note that there are certain ways in which we usually wrongly combine states and events. Many times we have inner states that, although they seem to correspond to the event that is being lived, in reality they are totally out of control. For example, we see at a funeral a person who feels totally dejected, who cries uncontrollably, who screams, who wants to die. And on the other hand, you can see, like, for example, a person at a celebration who gets drunk and gets up to dance on the table, gets out of control. Or someone in a debate of opinions in which it is assumed that the correct state would be to be, I don't know, rigorous and defend the point of view, but the person becomes furious and yells and offends. So many times we have inner states that, although they seem to correspond to the event, they are totally out of control. Other times, the inner states definitely do not correspond to the other event, like the person who is crying in the middle of party, or the one who is laughing and making jokes at a funeral. If we analyze it, we can begin to understand that having an incorrect state before an event, whether it seems to correspond to the event or not, is what brings us so many complicated situations, and it is the reason why we can never really get the best out of each situation, and that we cannot rescue the respective hidden learning that each event has for us. But we also see that sometimes long awaited events, when they came, we feel like something was missing. Like the person who waited so impatiently for her wedding day and was making so many preparations to make it a perfect and magical event, and at the precise moment of the event was so worried about the details, the people, the cooks who arrived late, or the musicians who didn't play the songs she wanted, etc. That the event, instead of the magical and special moment that she hoped it would be, became simply like a tedious and even annoying event for her. Other times, it happens that things that are not planned, but at the moment of being given, having us an appropriate inner state, are actually very pleasant and are actually very beneficial. But we can also see that many times the event can be directly caused by the inner state that the person has. For example, the death of a person, which is an event, can occur because that person didn't know how to modify the continuous inner states of sadness and depression and ended up committing suicide, for example. Or because in a given situation, the person didn't know how to modify a strong state of anger and violence and killed another or had himself killed. Or, for example, the event in which, or the event that was to meet such a person who became our partner, occurred due to the inner state of loss that we carried at that moment, or perhaps the state of loneliness and sadness we had. And this is interesting to observe because we can see how our psychological defects, all those ways of being that we carry within ourselves, are the ones that manipulate us, leading us to live in one way or another the different circumstances that happens to us in life. And sometimes they are the cause of the different circumstances. And we saw when we talk about the law of recurrence that it is our psychological defects which lead us to have our different inner states who lead us to live existence after existence the same event recurrently. And it turns out that there is not within us a conscious individual who constantly controls this human machine, but we are led by the desires of each of our psychological defects. If the defect of sadness that lives within us wants to lament and cry, then in that state we go and we fall. If the defect of anger wants to scream and hit, then to that state we fall. If the defect of laziness wants to waste time doing unnecessary things, or wants to get up late again, with which we always have to leave the event of the discussion with my boss, in that state of laziness, we go and we fall. We don't have control over ourselves. Being in control is different. When we learn not to let our psychological defects take us from one inner state to another, and we allow our consciousness to manifest itself in us in each event that we have to live, we will be on our way to becoming wise. You can see that the wise man may be, yes, cheerful, but never full of crazy frenzy. Can be sad, but never hopeless and downcast. A wise man may be serene in the midst of violence, abstemious at the orgy, and chaste among dogs, etc. And to achieve this state of self-control, it is necessary that we learn to correctly combine our inner states with the external events, since it is the only way to live, let's say, intelligently. Now, how can we correctly combine states and events? Well, let's see here a few steps. First, we must remember that we must keep before any event, before any circumstance that comes our way, in a self-observation state. Since only in a constant state of self-observation we will be able to identify first the inner state in which we currently are, identify the causes or the psychological defects that have us or want to lead us to this inner state, in order to be able to modify these inner states by eliminating these defects, so we can remain consciously living the present moment in a state of self-observation. That's the only state in which our consciousness can express in us. So once we are in self-observation, the next thing is to become aware of the event that we are going to live or that we are living, and then make psychological confrontation, analyzing what is the correct state that we should have in that event, wondering what our mood should be at that event. Making ourselves like conscious of this. For example, if we go to lunch with the family, we are already aware of the event that we are going to live. So if we make a logical confrontation, we see that the correct state is to be there, concentrated, enjoying food and enjoying the company in a state of harmony. If we are, for example, facing an event in which, let's say, an accident has occurred, then by making a logical confrontation, we will deduce that the correct inner state is to act quickly but maintaining concentration and calm. If the event that we are going to live is that we are going to talk with a person to solve a misunderstanding, then by making a logical confrontation, we will know that the correct inner state must be of serenity, of calm, and self-observation. So we'll see when doing this exercise that a correct inner state in front of any event will always entail staying focused, living in the moment, in a state of self-observation. And why? Because only in that state our consciousness can manifest itself in us. And only by staying in that state we will be able to identify all the psychological defects that want to react in the wrong way, leading us to make mistakes, leading us to enter into incorrect inner states, and enter in having a lack of control. And once we have made that logical confrontation and we have found what is the correct inner state before the event that I'm about to live or that I am actually living, the next step will be keeping ourselves in a state of self-control, practicing the ongoing death. That is to ask for death for any psychological defect that wants to lead us to react in this or that way, or to the one that is manifesting in our mind, complaining about this or about that, or criticizing or fantasizing. So if we are trying to be focused in the here and now, living consciously without keeping a correct inner state in front of that event, everything that is coming to my mind to take me out of the present moment, of the concentration that I must have in that event, I'm going to ask for death for all those details that are manifesting in my mind. I'm going to ask my interior divine mother to eliminate all those thoughts, the justifications, whatever is showing in our mind. The same we are going to do with our emotions. All that emotions of like or dislike, anxiety, worries, overexcitement, etc. And also we are going to observe the things that are manifesting in our body, even in our sex, so we can stay living the present moment from the beginning to the end of the event. So we are going to keep a control over ourselves. In this way, if we practice this technique, we will have very positive experiences of any event that we live. Because by staying in a balanced state, in a state of consciousness, we will be able to live the situation in the best possible way. We'll be able to transcend any recurrence that should occur in that event, since we will have eliminated the psychological defect that should act in that recurrence. Let's say that, for example, in that family lunch, I have a recurrence of arguing or even fighting with someone. If I am in a state of self-control, self-observing, and keeping my correct inner state, I'm going to be able to identify when the defect of anger, when the defect of impatience, of intolerance wants to manifest in me. I'm going to eliminate all of that, and I'm not going to enter into that fight. So I'm going to be able to transcend that recurrence. But we also be able to extract the wisdom, the teaching that experience came to leave us with. We must remember that this planet where we came to make this physical manifestation is school, where we came to obtain wisdom. And we obtain wisdom by living wisely every moment of our lives. These are the basic steps to correctly combine states and events. First, self-observation. Second, see what is the event to live and make a logical confrontation to find the appropriate inner state for that event. And then we are going to remain in control. Practicing the ongoing death, we are going to stay in the present moment from the beginning to the end of the event. And there is something that is extremely important for us to understand. And it is the relationship that this topic has with what is called the law of attraction, or the law of correspondence. And it is a law that says, as within, so without. And this because according to the inner state that we constantly have, the different circumstances that we will attract to our lives will be. Therefore, a person who admits inside, for example, states of sadness and depression, will attract into his life that situations and circumstances always happen that lead him to feel, bad. People will move away from him, or will betray him, he will go wrong at work. But you may ask yourself, why? Because a wrong state is a magnet for misfortunes. We must understand that. The same person, if constantly maintains internal states of bad temper, of anger, and violence, will constantly attract violent situations into his life. And it happens that when we admit these wrong states into ourselves, we not only make our lives bitter for ourselves, but we also make life better for others. But instead of reflecting on this, what we usually do is that we fill ourselves with self consideration. We tend to justify ourselves, believe ourselves to be good, and thus, for that reason, we never change. So it is extremely important to always identify through self observation when those wrong inner states wants to nest in us, or to identify if we already are into one, to eliminate them immediately from our psyche. On one occasion, I was reflecting on sadness, and I realized how exhausting and heavy it is to be in states of sadness and depression. However, what we usually do when we find ourselves in that state is that instead of doing everything possible to get out as soon as possible from that negative emotion, what we usually do is that we feed it. And we remember and we recall what made us sad, or we take advantage of and remember all those things for which we have been sad. And we put on sad music, or we watch sad movies, trying to maintain that negative state for longer. And what we must understand is that if we really want to self realize, if we really want to awaken our consciousness and achieve enlightenment, we must never admit in ourselves, under any circumstances, those that we could call very wrong states, such, for example, the pessimism. And what is pessimism? That constant feeling that things are going to go wrong, that they are not going to pay me that money that they owe me, or that such a person will not do me that favor, or that I'm not going to get a job, or that I'm never going to find a partner, etc. And what is the problem with pessimism? That we constantly attract that those things that we are feeling or saying end up really happening to us. And it turns out that as by thinking and feeling that way, we are feeding those psychological defects. So when it attracts the negative circumstances that we predicted to come, when we see that that is actually happening, what we do is that we feel justified. We feel that we had reason to have a thought that way, and we always continue to do so, making a vicious cycle, a vicious circle out of it. Like we always think that things are going to go wrong, and this way we are attracting things to go wrong. And then when things go wrong, we say, "Yeah, I was right. Things were going to go wrong," and we continue thinking the same and attracting the same circumstances. But that is not the whole problem with pessimism, but also that the mere fact of having thought, felt, and many times even predicted that something bad was going to happen, when it doesn't happen, when the opposite to our bad omen happens, we do not enjoy it, because deep down, the pessimist expects bad things to happen. And if we are working on ourselves with pessimism, it will be impossible to advance in this work. Because if we have to face a psychological defect, for example, a vice or any negative way of being, but all the time we think that we will not be able to eliminate it, because that is very difficult and we are very weak. The truth is that it will be impossible for us. Or if we go to practice supersex, but we are thinking that the most probable is that we will have a sexual fall, because that of not fornicating and achieving chastity is very difficult. If we go that way, we will most likely end up having a fall. Or if we are going to teach this knowledge to someone, and we are thinking that that person will surely not like it, or that the person is going to make fun of me, etc. Well, as we are not going to teach out of love for others, but out of fear of what they will say, it is difficult, or it will be difficult for us to transmit the teaching to that person. So we see the importance of never admitting to ourselves these very wrong states. Another very wrong state is hatred. Hate is perhaps the lowest feeling a person can experience. Now, definitely, a person who aspires to self fulfillment cannot allow feelings of hatred and contempt to nest within. Hatred distances us from our being, from God, from that sacred absolute Son where the law of love reigns. Immediately we feel that we are having negative feelings around something or around someone or even around ourselves, we must judge that feeling, that eye of hatred that is quietly expressing itself, and we must immediately eliminate it. Another very wrong state is melancholy. And melancholy are those states of sadness and depression. We must understand that staying in these states makes those eyes of sadness, melancholy, and self consideration to rob us all of our strength, all our energy, all the spirit and the disposition for the inner work. Likewise, the self consideration, that as we saw in the last lecture where we talked about the psychological song, actually generates a lot of pain, load us with resentments, and completely sleeps our consciousness. So we must never admit in ourselves and under any circumstances those very wrong states. Never. And the last thing that I want to tell you in relation to this topic of states and events is about the personal events. We must know that we all have personal events. Life actually is nothing more than a succession of events that change incessantly. And it happens that if we are not working on ourselves, these are just that, personal events. But when we are working on ourselves, when we have already decided in this existence to do the work of our being, waking our consciousness, then they become trials. Every situation in our life is a trial where patience, diligence, chastity, perseverance, temperance, humility, etc. will be tested. Since the way we react to the different events in our life will reflect the quality of the inner work that we are doing. That is why it is so important that we learn to live our lives wisely. And it is important to observe that there are modifiable events and non-modifiable events. And it is important that we learn to distinguish them and to know how to live them correctly while maintaining a correct inner state before each one of them. The modifiable personal events are those uncomfortable or unpleasant situations that happen to us, but that we can modify. For example, we leave, let's say, the house in a hurry. Obviously, we are not observing ourselves, and once on the street, we realize that we locked the house, leaving the keys inside the house. That is a personal event that, although it is certainly uncomfortable, it's certainly unpleasant, it is modifiable. If we don't apply what we learned in this lecture, what we will do? Well, we will identify with the situation, we will regret, we will despair, we will start to complain, or we can even begin to fight with the partner, to blame him for having left the keys in the house. And the partner will blame us back. And in that event, we get to fail, for example, a trial of anger. On the other hand, if we put this lecture into practice, the first thing we do in the event is to self-observe ourselves, to realize everything that begins to arise within us and ask for death for everything that is moving within us. Quickly analyze also what is the correct inner state for that event. So we'll realize that the correct inner state before that event is one of tranquility, calm, understanding that it is a modifiable event and focusing on the solution, be it calling a locksmith or breaking a window glass, whatever. And we are going to remain in self-observation and ongoing depth, maintaining the correct inner state until the end of that event. If we do it that way, we will save a lot of troubles. We will, which would have be generated by letting the ego act. And instead, we will be able to get a lot of wisdom out of that situation. We will be able to rescue patience, to rescue calm, to rescue love. The second type, those are the modifiable personal events, and that is the way to handle them. And the second type of events are the non-modifiable ones. Those are uncomfortable or unpleasant circumstances that happen to us and that cannot be modified. For example, the death of a loved one or pet, or for example, that our partner was unfaithful to us with another person. These are things that no matter how hard we try to remedy them, they are already an unchangeable fact. And for that reason, we tend to sink into despair, terribly identifying ourselves with the event. Whether the situation is modifiable or non-modifiable, reacting in the wrong way only causes more tragedies to arise. People who react in an absurd way to any event in a given situation easily end up in a hospital, in a cemetery, or in jail. A person who, for example, is faced with the event of finding her partner being unfaithful, if he fails to maintain a correct inner state, can easily end up killing someone or committing suicide. A person who, when faced with an event in which he is publicly humiliated or slandered, can react in an absurd way and end up in a hospital or in prison. And the problem is that we don't know how to avoid or get out from the suffering in which we get because of our different personal events, and especially from the non-modifiable ones. So, to end this lecture, let's see two aspects that it is important to consider that will help us to get out from suffering. The first thing will be not identifying ourselves with pain. This seems to be hard, but we must remember that we fall into suffering only when we identify with pain. And the problem when we are faced with these circumstances is that we usually tend to identify ourselves with pain. We feed it with negative thoughts, with negative emotions. We surrender to the defects of despair, grief, self-pity, anger, resentments, thus making the pain grow, and we cannot act consciously, nor we can learn from the experience. We must remember that consciousness doesn't suffer. Consciousness only observes and understands. And although it sometimes seems that pain is inevitable, suffering is always optional. And we will discover that if we don't identify with the problem that has arisen, the pain just disappears. So what we have to do, the same, put this theme into practice. Maintain a correct inner state through self-observation and psychological depth, and every time pain comes to get us out of the state of harmony and serenity in which we find ourselves, we don't admit it. We ask for death for each memory, each thought that wants to lead us to suffer, each emotion, each sensation, so we stay living the present moment, the here and now. And the second thing will be to understand that everything passes. everything. Everything that is born dies. Everything we receive, at some point, we will have to lose it. Everything that comes, at some point, will go away. That is a fact. Therefore, clinging into things, not wanting to let them go, is absurd and is what leads us to suffering, that we don't accept the fact that everything passes. We must learn to see life for what it is, a movie full of sins. When we learn to see life in that way, without identifying with its sins, maintaining an appropriate inner attitude, we will be able to draw learning from each event. Since by maintaining a state that allows us to observe and eliminate each of the negative ways of being that inhabit in our interior, and that we will only be able to observe and to discover when they try to manifest in us according to the specific event that we are living, we are going to rescue all the consciousness, all the light, all the understanding and love that otherwise we couldn't rescue. Many of us would like to go to a mountain or a monastery, separate from the world and all its situations to achieve peace, to achieve happiness and enlightenment. But the truth is that only in this psychological gym that is life itself, which all its events and all its circumstances, is where we have the appropriate material to get to know ourselves, to get to transform our lives and to wake up. So we must learn to use all the opportunities, all the personal events that we have to live, so we get to know ourselves, so we get to develop our consciousness. That is actually the way to get to know ourselves. Well, actually, this has been today's lecture. And if you, when watching this video, have any question regarding this topic, you can write it there in the chat of the video, and I will be solving any question that you have, or you can write here in the page through the message. So I will be in touch with you. And I want to remind you, first is that's the best weapon a man can use in life is the correct psychological state. And I want to invite you to next Sunday, next lecture. That will be lecture number 20 of the self-knowledge course, where we will be talking about concentration and relaxation. And we are going to be talking about how we can get to develop our concentration and how we can get to relax ourselves, relax our physical body, relax our mind, relax our emotions. We are going to teach all the steps to achieve a perfect concentration and a perfect relaxation. So don't miss next lecture, and that will be next Sunday to this same time through this page. So thank you very much to all who watched this video. See you next Sunday. Ciao, ciao.